Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Desiree Rover from the Netherlands. I'm a medical research journalist, but looking into the history of medicine, you dive into the rabbit hole. And this is the minority of one report. And it's my finding that even if you are a minority of one, the truth is still the truth, but you are a lonely voice. And the same sort of lonely voice my beautiful guest of tonight has, and that is Mel. Hello, Melanie.
Hi, Desiree.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank
And
you.
the subject that we have is a very, very, very sad one indeed. We try to make light also of it, and we try to do solutions as well. But you are a native of South Africa, right, Mel?
Yeah. I was born in South Africa, and I lived there for 23 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got quite a deep history with South Africa in terms of my heritage goes quite far back. And I was descended from a group of people known as the Boers. And Boer, as you know, means farmer. And these farmers, or these Boers, originated through many generations of farmers on the land, over 300 years worth. And it seems my lineage goes back through a group of people known as the Huguenots, which came to South Africa. And they actually were escaping Roman Catholic persecution after the Edict of Nantes was revoked in Europe. And this basically was when a whole bunch of French Protestant and Dutch Huguenots sort of jumped on boats and came and settled in South Africa and brought with them amazing skills, farming, winelands. Some of the Huguenot homes that were left behind in France were just beautiful, and they kind of reestablished themselves, making these amazing little parts of Cape Town. And this is one place called Franschhoek, which means French corner, and it's just incredible. You actually can sit at different little restaurants and have different wines, and there's a whole winery that goes with it, but it's just become a part of our cultural heritage. And these people seem to, when they go to South Africa, seem to really miss the truth behind how these people came to be there, and that they actually are in fact refugees in South Africa. And many of the people that came to South Africa were in fact refugees. They were getting away from something or other in Europe, largely the religious wars that were raging. So there was a large Calvinist Protestant group of people which settled in South Africa as farmers, and they eventually went on to become what was known as the Boers. And these are the same Boers that engaged in what was known as the Great Trek, where they crossed the frontiers and established the Boer nations, the two Boer nations. And these were the people that also were eliminated near enough in the Anglo-Boer Wars, where the British decided that they wanted the gold in the Boer countries, and that they were going to try and annex the Boer countries and just take it over from them. And the Boers were essentially free-loving and independent people. I mean, they're one of the states in South Africa is known as Orange Free State, and we've got cities, little cities called Vryheid. Ultimately, they just wanted to be free. They didn't want to be subjugated to the rule of the British. And that's really the heritage out of which I've grown. I've come out of a long line of Boers, and then my grandfather unfortunately was indentured as a slave to the mines after the Anglo-Boer War, because all the Boers had lost their farms. The ones that were left behind had to go seek work in the mines, and he died in the 1960 Colesberg mining disaster, which was one of the biggest mining disasters in history. It was over 500 people killed. Very sad. My mom was 4 years old, and of course my gran was a single mother at that time. Very difficult in those days. And that's kind of like the convoluted background of how my history is so deeply entrenched within South Africa. And there is such an emotional hook within South Africa into the various sufferings with regards to the conflict due to subjugation, invasion, discrimination, and ultimately greed of the capitalists and the bankers within the globalist agenda, under which South Africa is still currently suffering. So I think that's kind of where I come in as a South African, loving my home country and wanting to somehow bring awareness to what's going on there from the perspective of the global conspiracy. And that's my book, The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy, book one, Light and Dark, is gives an interesting sort of caveat from my perspective, and my awakening process and what I went on to discover about South Africa. And of course, it's not getting any better, as we've learned.
No, definitely not. In that case, Mel, we share a Huguenot background. My grandmother of my father's side was named Prince, which means prince. Wow. And it's a French name, so we share that background.
Yes, yes. I remember we have had this discussion. Yes, we are of the same Huguenot. So I think Lauren Murray as well is also,
yes,
she's of the Huguenot background.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
it's amazing, that, isn't it? Yet yeah. we all from different parts of the world with that same connection. The Huguenots scattered just about, trying to find refuge from that Roman Catholic persecution, and the Roman cult and their various accompanying allies, the Zionists, black nobility, and whatever else, Council 300, Illuminati. They're still all very much, those people were causing all the trouble back then, and they're still causing all the trouble now. And it's still the same entity ultimately that controls all of this that happened back then that it is today. And that's the most important thing that people need to come to understand.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. There is one question I have about when the Boers came to South Africa at the beginning. What I have understood is that there was two black tribes living there or roaming the landscape, the Khoi and the San. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. When the Dutch East India Company arrived at the Cape in 1652, the native people that were there were known as the Khoi or the San, the Hottentots as they were called. Actually, derogatively, they're called Bushmen. That's what if you reference them internationally, you say, the Bushmen. Most people kind of understand that it's these guys who walk around in loincloths who know how to cross the Kalahari Desert and know how to get water in that place, and they bury water in ostrich eggs and all sorts. I mean, they're an amazingly resourceful tribe of people, a very hardy race. And yes, they've been there for hundreds of thousands of years. In fact, I've done a documentary film called Secrets of the Kalahari, which I recommend people check out. It's on my website, dragonology.info. And it details all the information with regards to the history of the area known as the Kalahari, where the majority of the Khoi San are. And I focus particularly in on this area called Sedilo Hills, which has one of the densest concentration of rock art paintings you'll find anywhere in the world. And it really is a kind of pictorial history of the Khoi and the San people going back hundreds, maybe thousands of years. So they've been there for a very, very long time. And absolutely, when the white people arrived in South Africa at the Cape, those were the people that were there. They actually are not a black-skinned race. They're actually more like a light brown, a more tanned color in between. The more darker, what we call Bantu or Nguni tribes, they were actually not even in the regions of what we know as South Africa, really, apart from what you had were the Zulus on the east coast of South Africa, where Durban and Zululand is today. The thing is that what most people don't realize is the biggest genocide in South Africa that's ever happened was actually performed by the Zulus, who went and they genocided off a whole bunch of tribes, which is why when the Boers went crossing over to the frontiers in the Great Trek, there was nobody there. People say that they took land from the black people. No, there was nobody there. They settled on land that was empty because the tribes that had been there had been killed off by the Zulus. In fact, the Boers have written in their diaries about how they found these skeletons and tribes and whatever else and along the way. And clearly there had been some kind of carnage which had gone on that people didn't know about. And of course, in those days, there's no newspapers or historians to record any of it. We know very little about those wars, but we estimate that there were at least 1 million, maybe 2 to 3 million people killed by the Zulu warriors of that time, the fiercest warriors that call them impis, that existed and that basically just took out all the local native, probably exterminated entire genetic groups that we will never see again. And that's kind of how the Boer nation settled in those areas. They were left abandoned by those people who had been killed off. So no one, those Boers who moved on, they didn't actually take land from anybody. When the Dutch East India Company arrived, they actually arrived at the Cape of Good Hope, and there were people living there who didn't understand the concept of ownership. To them, they didn't know that you could attach yourself to a piece of land and claim that it's yours. They believed that they are merely stewards of this earth, which really is, in logic, is a more realistic way of looking at our true and most needed relationship with the planet. The fact, it's like the same with information. The fact that you think you can own any bit of information is just illogical to me. Ultimately, the earth and all its information that we all share is the common heritage of all people. And this is a deeply ingrained spiritual understanding that I had and that these people had, which of course gets corrupted when you have companies like the Dutch East India Company coming over who have tremendous power, that the power to imprison people, to appoint people as police officers, basically the powers of a country. They were given those powers because they were chartered companies, chartered by the king under license, given licenses in the form of charters by the king. So that's when, things started to change. But it was most of the people that came over for the Dutch East India Company, most people don't realize, they say, oh yeah, the whites came and they were so terrible. They were also largely indentured servants. They were actually coming over and faced very much a lot of hardship coming from the Netherlands and having to settle at the Cape and farm and find their way. And initially, the native people were very helpful towards them until Jan van Riebeeck and the Dutch East India Company put a bounty on the heads of these people, and actually on the lips. They said, bring back the lips of these Khoisan people. And that's not in the history books. You have to hear that directly from the people who passed the history down from the Khoisan nation. So you begin to see that, there was a group of people there. They were the original inhabitants of this area. And this is obviously the group of people that I'm now working with that currently have claimed what is known as the sovereign state of Good Hope.
Yeah. The first time I heard about the Sand people was when, as a medical research journalist, I wrote an article on Hoodia. That's a cactus that they brought with them, the Sun men, when they were hunting, because if they ate something of that Hoodia, they would not eat whatever they hunted, so they could bring it back to the tribe. And that sort of elegance and integrity, I think, is very, very special in people. And well, for that, I always honored the Khoi and the San without even knowing one of them. But that King Cornelius now is acting the way he is towards the whites in South Africa and brings them together with his tribes is in the same vein for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are a beautiful people. I must just say they are absolutely a beautiful people. And in fact, the kindness and humility you'll find in these people, because they are kind of so isolated from the rest of the world, they're not jaded and programmed into nastiness. In fact, when we began the process of going through the secession with King Cornelius and we brought various groups together, I think he was also a little naive. He believed that everybody wanted the same thing. And we started bringing people together and realizing actually there's certain people with agendas using this one and doing this behind people's backs. And it was very sad because his intention was always very pure. And as the hereditary tribal leader of the Khoisan Nation, he is actually the only person who has the right to that territory, which technically is recognized as Khoisan territory. We're taught about this in history books when we were kids. We're shown which was the Khoisan territory. We're shown this on maps. We have to learn this to take tests and pass at school. So they even teach this to you in basic education. They can't now tell us that it's not true because it wasn't even hidden from us. This is mainstream facts, that these people were there first and this was their territory. So now they're stepping up. King Cornelius has basically said enough's enough. The black people and the government have underestimated them because they thought, oh, they're too stupid to do anything. They're too, incapable or not savvy enough. And perhaps they're a little naive with certain things, but now there's things like internet and Skype, which has opened up a whole world of connecting and communicating with people. So, you know what? King Cornelius has brilliantly constructed himself a very reliable team, and or I should say a really trustworthy team. He's got probably the best legal advisor you could absolutely ever wish for, Professor Nagin. If anybody doubts him, please do check out his credentials. I mean, this is a man who's been through Yale University, who's currently a professor at Florida University. In fact, he just, I think, went into retirement this week. That's initially why it was the sort of cover under which King Cornelius went over to visit Professor Nagin, but actually whilst he was there, he went to the United Nations as well, which is very interesting. So he's informed the United Nations. He's basically given them the documentation and said, I am the king and ruler of this territories. Please, let us be. We want to be a self-determining nation, and we don't need anybody anymore. We don't need you outside guys to interfere. There's a lot of resources within the sovereign state of Good Hope, and there's a lot of very willing people and very desperate people and farmers, people with real skills who can absolutely turn the sovereign state of Good Hope into the solution that South Africa needs. And if the white people need somewhere to run because the blacks are taking away, their homes, so the sovereign state of Good Hope is going to be it. It's going to mean that there's certain people in South Africa that's going to have to shift around. But rather it be within South Africa than have to seek refuge from a foreign country, because let's face it, there are no foreign countries who are currently giving out refugee status to white South Africans fleeing the genocide that's currently going on in South Africa.
Yeah, the blacks you allude to, that are imported blacks from other places in Africa. That should be very clear, because even the people in government now are not original from that area. Is that correct?
There's, I must just say that it's very difficult. If you want to be really honest about it, it's very difficult to say, oh, this one's from here, this one's from here, because ultimately society in general, we're very transient. We are very transient. And yes, there were people there before, and then those people were taken out, but largely, we've got a lot of people influxing into Southern Africa from Nigeria and other African countries that aren't South African, but they are African, so they get priority over white South Africans who genuinely have South African passports. So there is a disequilibrium that now exists, and the existing African National Congress government has adopted policies which is outright racist and discriminatory against the minority groups, which is the white South Africans, which basically, it precludes them from various jobs. It makes earning a living very difficult. They don't get any social welfare of any kind. And now their properties are being seized from them by force without compensation. And it's basically turned into a bit of a disaster zone. The Rand has been declared junk status across the world, and international people are pulling their businesses out. International people who have homes here are selling up and getting out, and people are literally fleeing from their country as fast as they can because they think it's just going to end up like Zimbabwe. And to be honest with you, that would be a real shame, because it's truly one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and the people have such an amazing culture and spirit and soul. And it's really worth preserving. We already are so psychologically traumatized as a nation by the constant threat of fear the constant fear of violence and poverty, but we still maintain our integrity and still maintain our strength and still maintain our spirit and still maintain our soul. I just don't think we need to be put through a civil war or to have to fight with each other anymore. I think the time now is to actually look for the solutions that bring people together in a free, fair, tolerant, peaceful, sustainable nation state. And that is ultimately the aim of the sovereign state of Good Hope, which is what King Cornelius has created when he had the secession ceremony on the 24th of September 2017, where he effectively stood at the Cape of Good Hope Castle in Cape Town. And there was no mainstream media there. They were all welcome to come and film this event, but none of them bothered to arrive. In fact, our network was the only network who got a chance to be able to live stream this event. And it's recorded in history for everybody to see that it did happen. He has seceded the Cape of Good Hope under the territory of the Khoisan Nations, which now falls under the sovereign state of Good Hope. And he has now just last week been to the United Nations. And on Friday, in fact, I got a phone call from New York from the King to say to me, it is done. There is nothing more we need to do in terms of, we don't need to ask anybody to recognize the sovereign state of Good Hope. We've claimed our freedom. I've come to inform the United Nations that I am the ruler of this territory and we are a free and sovereign nation. Thank you very much. And that's what he did. So, yeah, very glad that that's been done. Very glad that process is now completed. I myself don't have much belief in the United Nations. I do believe they're very much a criminal organization involved in a lot of heinous acts. Of course, you know, doing vaccine research, you would know this.
Yeah,
and I don't think their validation or acceptance is in any way, you know, giving more momentum or truth or validation to the cause that we're all about, which is the establishment of a free sovereign nation state, a self-determining nation state for the South African people. But that is really what we are all about, and that's what we're planning to do. And I've been given the arduous task of international media advisor to the King and the sovereign state of Good Hope. He appointed me by a mandate. And we, of course, run all of his online activity, websites, and we manage his contacts and public relations, people contacting the contact page through the website. We're at the moment fielding them and communicating with them and just trying to, and there's a lot of people getting in touch now that the King has been to the United Nations, like, okay, now there's something to this, okay? So it's gotten a lot of excitement over the last couple of weeks. It's especially since they can now see this is something legitimate. If he's prepared to go all the way to the United Nations, then there's got to be something legitimate here. It's not just some crazy person doing, oh, yet another free man of the land stunt. This is really someone who's got something real going on. And actually secession is recognized under United Nations law and African Union law and international law. It's written in their constitutions, so they can't say, oh, you know, it doesn't exist. And he's been advised by possibly one of the top legal advisors on the planet, Professor Nagin. So if you see some of the organization that Professor Nagin is a chair of, it would be very hard to say that there's anything wrong with the paperwork or that it hasn't been conducted lawfully or that it isn't in accordance with existing laws and procedures, because it absolutely is. This guy teaches people how to go about those procedures and what those laws are. In fact, he sets the definitions for a lot of legal terms as well. He consults in that way. So we're looking forward to seeing where this goes, because it's got teeth. You know, it's so legitimate within the lawful framework, which isn't to me very legitimate, but it's legitimate within their illegitimate framework. So let's see. Do they recognize it? We don't care. I think now what needs to happen is we need to get an alternative financial system in place, which collects taxes in a way that it returns it directly to benefiting the community, because at the moment most of the taxes are just flying into the pockets of corrupt politicians and, you know, all sorts of things, the IMF, World Bank and all of that. That needs to stop. That money needs to stop going there and go straight back into the sovereign state of Good Hope and turn it around. Get rid of all that poverty. There is so much resources in their country. It's just unbelievable. And Cape Town is without a doubt one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I've seen many travel programs where they do these, top 10 places in the world you have to visit. And Cape Town's always in the top 5. So, with that in mind, I think it's about time that the revolution in the South happened. The example is set because South Africa has always been a political testing ground. And what you see happening in South Africa and what has been happening now is people are starting to recognize it happening in America. And they're starting to see, okay, well, the concept of white genocide is spreading across the earth. And like you're one of the first people of my group of friends to kind of recognize what's happening in Europe. Even I, as a white South African, was like, well, hang on a second. I don't know if I want to go there, but I can't now but agree with you, Desiree, now that I know what I know after all the experience and research that we've been doing, that there is absolutely a pernicious plot to wipe out the white race. And South Africa, where it's starting.
Yep. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And it's gruesome. Yeah, it's very difficult. So the blacks that are in the government right now in South Africa, after the recent elections, these people do not recognize the state of Good Hope, do they?
Of course not. Well, like I said, none of the mainstream media turned up. Why? Because the mainstream media in South Africa, like in most countries, is government controlled. Okay? So no, they didn't show up. And because they didn't show up, nobody got to know about it. And although more people in South Africa are getting online, there's still a huge majority of people who don't use the internet. So independent media is not that accessible. But mind you, more and more people are getting mobile phones, smartphones, and the more we get in time, the further down time we go, the more updated these phones become. So you're able to receive and watch these things through your phone as well. So I do think there is an information crescendo that's kind of happening just on the periphery, and it wants to break through into the mainstream so desperately, because people are realizing that things like fake news and manufactured reports and all of that, and crisis actors and events and all that kind of nonsense, and people just don't believe anymore what they hear on TV.
True.
None of it makes sense. So we're seeing this a little bit of awakening happening to what's going on in the independent media, but there's also a lot of confusion because there's a lot of disinformation being fed into the independent media deliberately to confuse the awakening people. Mm-hmm. So the African National Congress government that's in power are largely relying on it's actually a very pernicious story, because there's now a counter rival called the IFF, Inkatha Freedom Fighters. And they're headed up by Julius Malema, who is a Marxist socialist of note. He's the one saying that, we got to confiscate all the land and, make it state-owned and distribute it to the public. But, in communist countries where they claim everything is distributed evenly, actually it's still all controlled by the state. It's just not privately owned. And capitalism is done away with and all that. And that's really what he wants to do. But he's very misguided, I think, and absolutely a paid agent of the dark agenda. I mean, I'm sure he's an agent provocateur of the Roman cult, because you don't get a more Roman name than Julius. I have some concerns for that, because even if the African National Congress government lose in the next elections, it's the Inkatha Freedom Fighters, the IFF, that'll come into power. And they're even more radical than the ANC. And I think that's what's most likely is going to happen. And that's a little bit frightening, because Julius Malema is a dangerous character. And I think that's ultimately what people want is, the black people want is, they think that the white people are responsible for the dire state of affairs. Half of them live in utter squalor and poverty, and they think it's all the fault of the white people, which isn't true.
No, I think it's the opposite.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, South Africa in the 60s had one of the best economic systems in the world. And that was during the time of President Verwoerd. And it was so good, he didn't need any international loans from the international bankers, which is why the Rothschilds eliminated him. That's why they assassinated him. Yeah. And they claimed that he's such a bad guy because he invented apartheid, when actually, this is something, it's good that we're touching on this. You know, when you talk to people about South Africa, they seem to know about apartheid and Nelson Mandela, but those two facts are so misconstrued in the mainstream press. And the thing about Verwoerd is he brought in a policy of the Bantustans. And the Bantustans means like Afghanistan. Stan is similar like to stad, you know, which is city in Dutch, okay? And a Bantustan is like Bantu, which is the black people. They're cities, and it's just separate areas where they had their own self-governing homelands, their own judiciary systems, their own infrastructure. The kids got to be taught in their own native languages. They weren't being forcibly indoctrinated into the language of the white man, which is what was happening at the same time in Canada in the Indian residential schools. They were forcibly indoctrinating native white children and stripping them of their Native American tribal identities. And what Verwoerd was doing was the complete opposite, which was offering them a chance to have their own self-determining, self-governing homelands where their kids were educated in their own language, where their cultural heritage was preserved. And this was a threat to the globalist agenda. So they spun something called apartheid, and, oh, it's so bad. And they got the world to believe that if you were anti-apartheid, you were pro-freedom, which is the biggest load of bullshit ever heard. Okay? That is not the case. In fact, the liberation movement under Nelson Mandela has done nothing to bring freedom to its people. If you ask any South African, South Africa is no more free after the presidency of Nelson Mandela than it was before. That is a fact. Every South African will tell you that, even the black people. Okay? They all know it. That's the truth. So Saint Mandela was actually a Knight of Malta, absolutely a Vatican puppet, a 33rd degree Freemason, sold his people out down the road, and it's now being discovered that there's millions tucked away in offshore accounts that have, you know, kind of just been left there. He was hiding money everywhere because he was getting paid off by so many people. And, you know, it's common knowledge to anybody who with a bit of discernment in this information world about South Africa that Nelson Mandela made no major decisions without consulting the Zionist Jew Oppenheimers, the Illuminati bloodline branch managers of South Africa.
Yeah. Yeah, and you recognize the signature when you look at Israel. They have apartheid, but in the same way as it is happening now in South Africa.
Well, yes. There is this belief amongst a certain echelon of people, whether you want to say it's a Jewish thing or a Zionist thing or an elitist thing or a dragon reptilian thing, where they actually believe certain people are less deserving, are goyim, are not worthy of certain knowledge. And these other people, as we know, they keep this initiatory knowledge to themselves, including occult knowledge of free energy. You know, I'm absolutely convinced that they've got weapons and stuff that are working on free energy. We've seen Dr. Judy Wood's presentation. I think you and I were both at the Breakthrough Energy Movement Conference, where we got to see Dr. Judy Wood's presentation, absolute definitive proof of directed free energy weapon technology being used against the people of this world. Who by? You know, there's a number of alphabet letter agencies that we could rattle off. But the fact is, this technology does exist. It is being used against people, and it's not being shared with us to empower us. So, you know, there's a very pernicious plot at play that absolutely includes the whole South African thing. And the worst thing is that the one demographic of people within South Africa that actually stand in the way of complete totalitarian takeover of South Africa is the wealthy merchant white people, okay? the sort of group of people that my parents fit into. And it's quite a lot of them, people who've actually established themselves with their own businesses. They live in nice houses, maybe got a holiday home somewhere else in South Africa. Lots of security, because you've got to live behind lots of security in South Africa if you're white and you've got a bit of money. And these people are a threat to the globalist agenda because they own property. And ultimately, it's about, depriving people of private property so that all ownership goes back to the state, because ultimately that's what they want, is they want complete ownership of the planet. And they're looking at any old way to try and do it. And if the black people think that by taking the properties, they get to keep it, sorry. They just get to be there until they're a problem, until the next solution is manifested to get rid of them off the land, whatever the next iteration of this manipulation is. There's no way that the masses of black people who are all behind this, let's get rid of the whites because they're so bad, have any idea just how bad it would be when you remove those people who run the infrastructure, who run the pilots who fly the planes, all that kind of thing. You're not going to be able to go anywhere when you don't have trains and infrastructure and whatnot. Exactly. They are systematically clawing at that and tearing it away. They're destroying it. They're burning. They're pillaging. Universities are being destroyed. They're going crazy at the moment. Burning down historical buildings. It's very sad to see.
Yeah. And they don't have the notion that in the end, they are left with nothing as well.
I think there's a mind control rage, and I see how song, you get them together in a group of people, and song is used to hypnotize the crowd and whip up their frenzy. And they've got these very inflammatory songs like Kill the White Farmer, Kill the Boer, which you hear them singing, and they're dancing, like Bring Me My Machine Gun and things, and they dance and they toy, and they get all hit up, and this stuff kind of brainwashes into them as they're singing these lyrics. And it's interesting to watch, because if you understand anything about how mind control works and how the music industry works, you just have to watch the South African black people and you go, oh, okay, well, that's what that is all about. These songs are there to indoctrinate them into this mindset of killing white people, and that's what it does.
Yeah, it's very primitive on the one hand and very insidious on the other, and it's a technology by almost.
Yeah, it is a fine art.
Yeah, yeah. And well, I heard on Rents, I heard Carl Foster. Do you know him? No. Well, he is a South African who tells what he is seeing around him, and he said something like people are bringing backpacks with jamming technology inside, so that when a farm is attacked, a white farm is attacked, people cannot use their phone to do a warning signal.
Yeah, this is what we're seeing. Now, bearing in mind that my parents had like an unbelievable security system, alarms, armed response, if the alarms go off, the phone rings, my mom has to give them a code. If the code isn't right, they're over there with like big guns and everything, within minutes. If there's an intruder, they're over there as well, armed response. My parents pay heavily for that. A lot of people have this armed response, paid for the service. Now, it's common in South Africa for there to be so much security that, it's just untrue. Burglar guards, security cameras, motion detector cameras, all the sort of thing. So a lot of these farms and whatnot you can imagine security cameras filming. And what is interesting to notice is these farm attacks that happen, it's very organized. These guys look like they've got stealth and military training. And that's the one element that's quite scary. And the equipment that they have, jamming equipment. I mean, what do you make jamming equipment out of forks and a colander from your kitchen? No, it's military grade equipment. Okay, it's been given to them by the military. They're coming in with night vision goggles and all sorts. The equipment that they're coming in with is military-grade equipment.
Yeah.
There is absolutely, the government is behind these farm murders and these groups of terrorizing individuals. It's not always the case that you have a well-armed and well-equipped group of people going into the farm. Sometimes it's just a bunch of hit-up native people who go and start toying on the land to get the farmer out, and they've got nothing more than sticks and whatnot. And if there's enough of them, they will just trash the house and kill everybody there as brutally as they can. But there's also the ones that are so organized with their equipment. And you also, that's the one element that's scary. The other element is they seem to be trained in torture tactics, okay? They seem to have been trained how to torture people. Yeah. And it seems that there's groups of people being taken aside and trained in torturing and causing as much pain as possible. Because I'm thinking of myself as a human being. I would never know how to boil someone in hot oil or think of crucifying someone to a table. Just the things that they've done, the horrific scenes that have been created by these people, because they've done some terrible things, dragged the guy behind the car until his organs burst. It's disgusting, the level to which they will enforce harm and suffering and violence and ugliness. They have been trained and taught and encouraged to make this as vicious and violent and brutal as possible. And there's several levels to this. Obviously, it encourages a culture of fear within the white population. The fear is very paralyzing, and it does something psychologically and physiologically to your brain. But also, on another level, on an energetic level, it creates some huge amount of energetic loosh for the archons. I mean, they feed off this kind of dark depravity. That's why in satanic rituals they cause as much pain and suffering as possible, because they want to feed off that fear and that loosh. And that's what these guys are doing. They're being taught to create dragon food on the other levels whilst they ritualistically murder white South Africans. And you'll notice it's farmers that are being targeted, because I can absolutely guarantee you this is still an act of the Jesuits. The Jesuits have an extreme oath under which they have sworn to eliminate all heretics, Protestants, liberals, Huguenots. And the Boers are the descendants of the Huguenots, and most of them are Calvinist Protestant. You will not find a Boer in South Africa that's Roman Catholic, very seldom. Mm-hmm. So it's still part of the counter-reformation process. This is still acts of the Holy Office of the Inquisition that we're seeing now. That's what most people don't recognize, is the Vatican's hand in what is going on. Bearing in mind, the Roman Catholic Church controls and the Jesuits and the Knights of Malta, all the various Knight orders, they control the intelligence services of the world. It's the intelligence services, of course, that then control the various military outlets of the world. Okay, and where is all this equipment coming from? How is it? It's directly connected through that vein, and you start to see, okay, they've got military-grade equipment. That means actually, you know what, the people from the very top are assisting them through their various intermediary agencies, military and intelligence and whatnot, probably plotted from the very dark heart of the beast. And I mean, it comes directly from the Roman cults. Torture and whatnot. They were experts in torture.
Yeah.
You're seeing these patterns play out, and there's absolutely cult training going on. I call them Uhuru cults, because Uhuru was a word that is adopted by them for the Night of the Long Knives, where they go out and they murder all white South Africans. These Uhuru cults are being trained in torture techniques, and they are absolutely doing horrendous things to the farm. It's not just going in, okay, taking over the land. It's, okay, let's go in and cause as much carnage and mayhem and pain and suffering and rape children and do all sorts of ridiculously satanically dark, brutal nastiness. I mean, it just beckons, one's belief that anyone can even think to do those kind of things. And yet, the international community does nothing. It's impossible for white South Africans who want to leave South Africa to be recognized under refugee status. Many people have fled to various other countries, and they go through the whole asylum application process, but it's very long, very laborious, very costly, and while they're waiting, they're illegal while they're there. They don't have papers, so they have to take work under the table. It's very hard for them to survive. They're not entitled to any social welfare, and sometimes after all of this, these applications get denied, and these people have to go back.
Oh,
all of this at a huge expense. This often costs people their life savings, and then they're left with nothing, and they end up in a very bad way. There are already over 1 million white South Africans living in white squatter camps.
Yeah,
that their poverty, desperate poverty situation is not just a black thing. It's absolutely now all across the board. So with half of South Africa's population now living in utter poverty, and the most openly corrupt government in the world, and what looks like to be an all-out genocide being played out against the white people, South Africa is in a pretty shocking state.
Yeah, it is. It's really awful to think about it, but people in the Netherlands, for instance, they know nothing about this. That's one of the reasons that I asked you to do this conversation, because it needs to be known in the world.
Yeah.
Everybody should know about this.
Yes, Desiree, I agree. Everybody should know about it. It's for no other reason that, there are many reasons. It's shocking and it's terrible, and people should have a conscience and care about what goes on in the world. Ideally, that'd be great. But also because South Africa has always been a political testing ground. And what happens in South Africa eventually happens in other parts of the world. And we're seeing it happen now. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The white genocide that started going on in South Africa a decade ago is now coming to a very horrible place where they're now reclaiming land by force, and that means they'll kill you to take your land. And if you fight back and you kill them, you go to jail for murder. It's happening. Yeah. There's a number of farmers who shoot the invaders on their property and they go to jail for murder. So you can't fight back. People have your property. It's like you have to give it to them, otherwise you go to jail for murder. If you defend yourself and you kill them, it's ridiculous. So at this stage, it's a case of something has to give. We absolutely have to find a solution for this, and it looks like the international community is not going to be the answer. And in fact, I don't want it to be the answer. I believe the people of South Africa need to rise up and take control of the situation. It's not up to some savior out there to come to us, whoever they think that might be, Donald Trump, NATO, the United Nations. I spent a long time, as you know, filing applications to the international criminal courts for the genocide that's going on in South Africa. And all they did was South Africa just pulled out of the ICC treaty when they were, a lot of pressure was being put on them because there was 3 or so applications that had been filed. And I was like, okay, well, I didn't know that you could just pull out the ICC treaty. Then what's it worth? Until I looked into it and realized that neither America or Israel, the 2 biggest warring states on the planet, are actually not signed up to it either. So what is the point of an international war crimes treaty and the whole, peace palace and all that nonsense they've got going on in The Hague? What is the point of all that when actually it's a bit of a joke? When
it's theater,
it's all theater. It's all a joke. And I had to find this out the hard way. And I think it's a lot of people thinking, oh, Donald Trump's going to come and help us out in South Africa. And I just want to remind everybody what's happened to other countries in the world where, suppose one group of people was attacking another group of people. Maybe those groups of people were agents provocateurs. We think of things like ISIS and, Al-Qaeda. Well, they're just intelligence agency operatives that are trained to cause conflict and false flag events. That's what ISIS and that's what Al-Qaeda were. They are intelligence agency operatives. And no doubt that a number of the people engaging in the farm attacks and all that in South Africa, again, intelligence agency operatives, there to cause conflict and all of that as part of these PSYOPs to bring the country to the state where they want it to be, the problem, reaction, solution scenario.
Exactly.
And we're seeing that play out in South Africa at an alarming rate. And the international community needs to take a look, because it's not just in South Africa. We are seeing absolutely the rolling out of a new world order in the most vicious way. And watch what's happening there, because it's going to be coming to a country near you or to the country you live in. It's only a matter of time. So that's why the rest of the world needs to sit up and take a long, hard look at this. I lived in the Netherlands for 10 years, as you know, Desiree, and I must be honest with you, the Dutch people are amongst some of the most ignorant, considering they're one of the most online nations in the world. Okay, more computer terminals per capita in Holland than anywhere else in Europe, and yet some of the most ignorant. You know, I was just astounded at the level of ignorance of the average Dutch person with regards to what's going on in South Africa. And, you know, and sometimes I would even get comments from people like, you know, oh, you're South African, but you're white. You know, that's how ignorant they are.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah.
And I'm like, yes. You don't even know your own history, mate. You know, you guys came and colonized South Africa once upon a time. And that's the level of ignorance we're working with, unfortunately. And you can only blame mainstream media, mainstream education for that. And in fact, the dire state of the planet really comes down to the fact that people are just miseducated and really are soul sick, and you know, ego, chasing the wrong things, focused on artificial connection to materialism. And every person has to engage that journey of breaking down and breaking past that, but not everybody does. And these are the people, unfortunately, they are the agent Smiths of the Matrix, and they are the ones that can cause you the most hassle when you are someone who thinks a little differently. And I myself and Biggie suffered persecution in Holland from people, our very neighbors, who didn't understand. They thought we're anti-government and we want to take down the government and all sorts, because we just, you know, didn't agree with some of their outlooks, and we weren't going to be roped into, you know, the way they wanted to impose their outlooks on us. You know, we know what we know. We're not going to impose what we know onto you, but we certainly are not going to be going along with what you think you know. You know, so a lot of people find it very hard. You know, it's like they want you to share their mental prison with you.
Absolutely, they do. Yeah, the crab mentality. As soon as one crab leaves the pan, the other ones pull him back. Well, and what I see is what we now have as politicians in The Hague, in the government, are younger people, and I really can't have very much respect for what I see there. And I know that we used to have Minister van Acht, and he found out only years after he was no more minister in Holland, minister-president, that how the situation is in Gaza with the Palestinians. And he woke up to that situation way after he was not in office anymore. And he is being made ridiculous, because this is the thing. He says something that other people can't believe because they haven't always heard the opposite of what he is saying now. So that can't be true. So he is crazy. And in that sense, they try to get rid of anything that might lead to greater knowledge about the real situation.
Yeah, I think some of these political bureaucrats have to be some of the dumbest people out there. And you'll notice that they're actually the ones who are smart. There are some people, you know, who eventually do come out. We've got the former president of the Reserve Bank in South Africa, who's actually woke up through his uncovery of corruption within the Reserve Bank, and he decided to write books, do research, and he's you know, Stephen Goodson has actually become one of the biggest whistleblowers to come out of South Africa, for example. And that's what you often find. Either they go along with the flow, or they at a certain point go, well, hang on, this is very damaging, and it could even affect me somewhere down the line. What do I do about it? Do I stand up about it? You know, which I think if you're a good person and you have a conscience, you have no choice but to stand up for these things.
Exactly. And that then you might have to pay a very big price for that. And I see that in the medical community where doctors are being heart attacked and suicided and that sort of thing, left, right, and center. So yeah, but I have this saying for myself is when I don't live my truth, there's nobody who will.
That's it. And you and I both know, Desiree, how lonely this path can be.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Being a pioneer of truth, I mean, you think of the pioneers, and I often think of my boy heritage, the Great Trek, these people going out, they were the first ones to go out across that territory. Being a pioneer makes you pretty much alone. Being a pioneer of truth, you are on the cutting edge, and you are sort of, well, particularly in our worlds where you have people who respect you for your ability to discern and disseminate information based upon methodical research. And again, it's once you're on that journey, very difficult in the truth movement to keep going with resources. It very much is. They throw things at you all the time. I mean, we're forever getting hacked, and we never ever have the resources to fix it. We patch it up and hope it lasts till the next day, and we never have it to properly get it as secure as we need it, for example. And they do this deliberately to try and wear us down, deter us. They've recently engaged in a YouTuber side where they've been deleting YouTube channels of people, and we've had people within our network who've had their YouTube channels deleted too. So they are now hammering down on us because there is, one thing you cannot stop the human spirit. It's such a powerful force. And those especially who are buzzed by truth and who know there's a better way, we're going to stand up and make as much noise because we cannot continue to contribute to a world that's so perversely corrupt and broken that it breaks us to be a part of that system.
Yeah, and I have grandchildren. What sort of world am I handing over to them if I keep my mouth shut?
Yes, exactly. I mean, what are you going to say to your kids one day? I walked you straight into the New World Order by participating in their agenda, or I did what I could. I did what I could. I'm sorry, you're inheriting a world that we failed to get correct. And I want you to know this is the knowledge that you need to know. At least you can say to them, give them direction. And,
I already do with my grandchildren. I tell them stories and stuff that they never hear anywhere else. And now they're used to it. that sort of stories comes from me. And I'm getting questions from them now. So they're sort of, well, how you say that? They try to work it through within themselves and then come back with questions to me. And that's amazing. It's fun to do.
Oh, that must be very rewarding. I think it must be very hard to be an awakened parent and see your child, for example, become a police officer or go into the medical profession or something like that.
Yeah. Well, it can be very hard. There is a person I know who works with cancer patients in a non-mainstream way. And then his daughter of 19 years old, she got cancer on her buttock, right there where her phone was always in her back pocket of her jeans.
Wow.
And her father is a non-mainstream cancer therapist. Wow. And she is taking chemotherapy right now.
No.
The oncologist, well, he did his voodoo act on her. So yeah, it can be that hard. It's amazing. It's really awful.
Man, cancer on the butt. You couldn't sit down. Shame, poor girl.
Yeah. But the oncologist, of course, says it has nothing to do with that cell phone. Of course not.
Yeah, just have to look at the research, you know.
Yeah. Look at the obvious.
So I don't have a cell phone.
Just apply logic.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, what can we do to spread the message in the Netherlands and Europe and the States and everywhere else that what exactly is happening now in South Africa towards the white population? Yeah, I think in the States, people are getting the idea that the whites are in the crosshairs because with all the raping that is going on, where the rapist is considered a victim.
Well, we actually have a lot of international journalists who are now seizing on this. They're seizing on the story. It's getting to people. So it's not that it's unknown. And even, you know, there's a lot of European Union parliamentarians who brought this before Brussels and demanded a conversation on it, and they've been shut down. It's not that the international community doesn't know. It's just that they're not doing anything about it. They cannot claim to not know anymore. You know, myself, as you know, I've been banging this drum for a very long time. And for a long time I was saying, nobody's listening to us. Now I'm saying, no, they've heard us. They know what's happening. They're just not doing anything about it.
They choose not to do. Yeah,
they're not. But at the same time, I'm not the kind of person that says, okay, as a country, South Africa should be going, please, outside world, come help us. Because, you know, they're appealing to America the most. America, please come help us, NATO. And that's the wrong thing to do. Because the last thing we want is an American occupation where they help themselves to the resources of the country, plunge the country into debt because they forcefully redevelop it and build bases and militarize various parts of it, etc., etc. You know, we don't want that. We do not want that. We just want corruption gone. We want the money that's paid in taxes directed back to the people's resources. You know, we have a situation in Cape Town, the actual territory where the Sovereign State of Good Hope covers. My mom called me a little while ago. She says, I went to this and this person's wedding, but you know what? I couldn't use a shower in the hotel. I had to shower. I had to go visit my friend's house and they have a shower, but then I was only allowed to shower into a bucket and use the bucket to pour into the toilet. And I'm like, Cape Town is surrounded on two sides by ocean. Why are they not desalinating? How can they claim to have a water shortage when they are surrounded by ocean? You take the salt out the ocean. You have perfectly usable sanitation water. And now I know there's a water shortage in Cape Town. And this is not because there's a lack of resources. It's absolutely about a mismanagement of resources, corruption in the mismanagement of resources, or I should say corruption in the management of resources, using public money going into the pockets of politicians and not using it to fix the infrastructure. The other thing which needs to be sorted out is the power grid. We've had a lot of power shedding where people have had to turn their power off for 8 hours a day so that, you know, the power factories didn't collapse on themselves. We need to get better technology, you know, wind farms, solar, even free energy. This whole, they want to build nuclear power stations and all this kind of thing. It's an absolute disaster. The management of the country, with that respect, and the people who are running it do not consider the best options that will benefit the people long term. They seem to deliberately choose the most destructive, the most harmful, the most expensive options available. It's like, you know, they see the good, but they go the complete opposite direction. And it's almost like they're being forced that way by a dark, evil force, which we know they are. There is something behind the scenes that's perniciously forcing them into a destructive pattern of behavior.
That's it, yeah. And what I hear in your story also is victimhood. They position themselves as a victim instead of standing up, assessing the problem, and look for the solution.
Yes, and there is a solution.
Always.
The thing is, there are solutions that exist to every single problem on this planet. The problem is getting people to agree to work together on implementing those solutions. Now, I found this out myself through the network that we run. You know, that is one of the best learning curves that I've had with this network is understanding that fundamental reality.
Yeah.
But that being said, we do have a unique caveat within South Africa under the sovereign state of Good Hope to create a place which can set an example for the rest of the world, a truly free and fair sovereign state that's self-determining. And I want to focus on, let's get this thing going. And we need the international community to also support it. We don't need international aid. We don't need anything. Everything that we need is within the country. Okay? There's an amazing resource of people, amazing minds, highly creative people who absolutely can step forward and offer solutions for nearly everything that we need to address. So we don't need the international community's approval. We don't need the UN to give us, their blessing, put a gold star on our foreheads and say, well done. The sovereign state of Good Hope exists. We've claimed our freedom, and now it's time to implement the structures that truly allow for a truly free, fair state that can give some alleviation to the problems in South Africa. It's not the ideal solution. There's still large chunks of South Africa that don't fall within the sovereign state, but King Cornelius can't claim land that isn't his or that isn't Khoisan. So he's only claimed the Khoisan land. And there may be people who will have to move to the sovereign state, but at least there is somewhere in South Africa to go. The next step, of course, is now stop paying the money that goes in taxes to the government and then start paying it into a government that's managed for the sovereign state of Good Hope and that redistributes the funding back to the community sector, the building of roads and infrastructure and whatever else. Because at the moment, that all is falling apart as well because no money is being spent on it. It's all going into the corrupt politicians, all going off to paying off international loans, all going off to funding illegal wars, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing how we're going to reach a mass amount of people and get them to agree to stop paying the taxes to the government, because that's all they have to do. They don't need the government to go, oh, yes, we acknowledge you. They just need to tell the government, no, bugger off. We're paying our taxes to our self-determining nation state, which we absolutely have the right to do as a lawfully seceded nation state. We have the right to self-govern within international law parameters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How is the state of the educational system in South Africa? Because when I look at America and also at the Netherlands, it's a dumbing down situation.
Oh, it's appalling.
Dog training, multiple choice.
No, it's appalling. It's appalling. Even in my day, it wasn't that great. But even back then, it's a little better than we have now. I still remember in English literature, they at least gave us books like Animal Farm in 1984. George Orwell. We were reading George Orwell in school, which I think was great for back then. That's quite a liberal move, But in general, I thought high school was like prison. It was very strict. I went to a very strict private all-girls school where we had uniform inspections and had to wear the same clothes, all of us. These horrible buttercup yellow dresses with bottle green blazers, a bottle green hat, and ugly brown shoes with, socks that had to be 4 fingers above the ankle. And, they used to come and measure. And you had to wear a petticoat. And they would do petticoat inspection to make sure you're wearing a petticoat. Oh, my God. It's a nanny state type situation. I'm like, no, thank you. I hated school. Most of my teachers I hated. I had a few teachers that I absolutely loved. But the majority of them were just, it's actually, I had the same thing at university. I'm a creatively talented person, and I had to be lectured by people who had absolutely no talent. I'm like, I've got to do exams, being taught material, which will determine the rest of my life by these Muppets. Really? Yeah. Really? Is this really how reality works? These Muppets determine my future? And if the teacher doesn't like you, she doesn't give you a good grade in school. It's not a determination of your actual value or intelligence. As I discovered, I've got in the top 10% of IQ, actually, and yet in school I managed to get into the D class, which is the A, B,
C. Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah.
the dumb class. I was placed there because I don't think the teachers liked me very much. I had too much attitude. I was too cheeky. And I think they thought I was a little bit precocious because from a young age, I was highly intelligent. I was reading before I went to school. I was reading encyclopedias, in fact. And, they thought I was precocious and a little bit spoilt and just a bit outspoken and naughty and cheeky. And I suppose that was really, if you really want to look at it and take away the negative associations, it was just my young, independent spirit not taking their bullshit right from the get-go.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's why I dropped out of university very soon after I started it, because I felt I was going to be pressed into a mold that was not me.
I dropped out of uni as well. In fact, in my first year of university, I had a car accident, which was almost like a blessing in disguise. I had been forced into university by my parents. I wanted to take a year off after school and go traveling. I've just done 12 years in prison. Now I've come out and I have to go to another freaking prison for another however many years. It's going to cost my parents a fortune. I'm like, no. But I had to. They wouldn't let me take a year off to go traveling. And so I went. First year I had of uni, I had a car accident and it put me in hospital for a number of months. I wasn't able to write my exams for the end of year. And during that time, my mom came to me and said, you're not going to be able to write your exams. What do you want to do about uni? I said, I'm not very happy there. And I begged her from my hospital bed to please let me go to arts college instead. So I enrolled in an arts college, and I was as disappointed, to be fair, because you don't really get to truly express who you are. They try to teach you how to be an actor, an artist, when I think true artistry comes from creative expression that's not defined by the parameters of, say, an education.
You can't put it into a box. No. That's
yeah. They're very much a little square beige box, and here I am, a bright, sparkly coloured star, and it didn't work. So that I found incredibly frustrating as well. Yeah. And at a certain point, I eventually just ended up going over to London at the end of the 90s, 1999, because I actually at that stage couldn't even get employment in South Africa because I was the wrong skin colour for my chosen profession. So I went over to London, and I was one of a number of people who kind of did the whole let the white people mass exodus. And at one point, near enough my entire high school year were with me in London, which was kind of surreal. And continuously running into people that I was in school with. So there has been a number of people who've kind of just up and moved when they realized the writing's on the wall. It's not getting any better here. And if you've got opportunities to get out, then you must go. And what I did, I went and, ended up making a life for myself that wasn't in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was asking about the educational system because when people have been getting the wrong information and the false history and the political correct agendas, how can we expect that they out of themselves get the idea that they might have been fed the wrong stuff? I see that in doctors as well. They just repeat what they have learned without asking whether it's working the right way.
And I must just say, the native people of South Africa are actually beautiful people, right? But very gullible. They actually believe all sorts of really strange things, like they'll go to a witch doctor, and the witch doctor will say, if you've got AIDS, you must go have sex with an alligator. And then these people did. And when they got munched by the alligator, they were like, well, we were told by the witch doctor to do this, or a traditional healer. They are that naive. Okay. Yeah. So they put unquestionable amounts of faith into people they believe have leadership or superiority. Of course, if you're not exposed to the rough and tumble world in the way that we are, consuming as much media as we are, you don't become as savvy or as much of a cynic. You're open and more trusting and more pure in your soul, I suppose, to a certain extent. And that's what people are, pure, naive fools, because they believe the government rhetoric. I posted something on Facebook the other day that says the forests were shrinking, but the tree still kept voting for the axe because its handle was made of wood and they thought it was one of them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this is the same. I mean, my mom's a domestic worker still says, Mom says to her, so who are you voting for, Gugu? And she says, I'm voting for Mandela. My mom says, Mandela's dead, Gugu. You know, why are you voting for Mandela? He's dead. This is, you know, the mentality you're working with is a lot of them, of course, are still living in very rural conditions, and they can't be reached with media. And then, of course, the education system, although it's gotten worse, it was never great to begin with. But considering the alternatives we have now with self-directed learning, world schooling, homeschooling, because you can get most of your schooling material online, there is no need to subscribe to an institutional education, particularly the ones that we have at the moment, because they're actually nothing more than institutions of brainwashing and mind-numbing and dumbing down.
Yes, right. Indoctrination. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is what I see and hear, with a very seldom exception. But most youngsters, I hear them just regurgitate what is in the papers and on the telly and that sort of thing. And that works. Yeah.
Not just youngsters. My parents do it. You know, my dad's addicted. He's had his newspaper delivered to his house every single day. Now that he's going blind, he listens to the news religiously. First thing in the morning, listens to lunchtime news, listens to news before he goes to bed, off the television. You know, I've come to him many times with alternative information. And if he hasn't heard it on TV, he doesn't believe it's real. You know, and he still puts a questionable amount of faith into the mainstream media. And it's heartbreaking for me, to see how out of touch they are with reality and that they're living a lie. And I've told them, you know, you're living a lie. This is not the way the world works, you know, and the fact that you guys are so protected and secluded within your little community is actually a problem because you live under a rock, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you never learn reality on face value. So, yeah.
Mm.
And on the other hand, you would like to protect them from having to...
Of course, you know, my family.
Experience.
The hardest thing is to be here on the other side of the world and see what's happening there and wonder what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was thinking about that too. Yeah, must be difficult.
Very hard.
I know there are several rehab centers in South Africa for drug addicts and other addictions. People from Europe regularly come down there. How safe is it for them?
Look, those rehabilitation centers are very well kept there. I'll be honest with you. It's not a problem if you are going into one of those clinics. It's very unlikely that you'll be faced with any kind of violence because they are generally well behind fences. There's normally security and things like that. It's still, I'd say, safe to go on holiday. If anybody's thinking of going to South Africa on holiday, please do not miss out on the opportunity to go over and visit. It's not like you walk down the street and you get raped and pillaged as you come out the airport. You obviously can't do stupid things like go walking through Soweto or the townships by yourself with lots of jewelry on, yakking on your cell phone. You obviously have to always watch where you put your handbag. I've, put my handbag over the back of my chair and had it stolen from me in a restaurant. That happens a lot. Obviously, if you go to places like India or very impoverished places, you have these pickpockets, or even in London, in the markets, you have pickpockets and stuff.
Yeah, in Amsterdam as well.
In Amsterdam. So you just got to be vigilant. Yeah. You should, don't do anything stupid. Don't be a hero and take big freaking cameras and go into the townships and think you're going to go make a documentary about poverty, because you'll come out, without anything. They'll strip you of all your stuff. But they're absolutely very safe touristy areas to go to. Definitely worth visiting is Durban, South Coast and North Coast. And absolutely Cape Town and the wine route, Knysna, George. That whole area is just incredible. and it's relatively safe. If you get into a car, you hire a car and you drive up and down, you'll be all right. I do recommend staying off the roads at night, and I do recommend that if you are driving the garden route, that you make sure that you top up with petrol in places that are not in the middle of sort of black townships and stuff. Don't put into petrol stations. And even I've done it. I've never, ever had an issue, to be honest with you. They just look at you like you're a little bit strange because you've got enough courage to be there. So I don't go with the whole thing of fear, although I have faced quite a bit of crime, been a victim of crime, and my family's been robbed and such like. But I do not want to encourage the whole pretext of fear. South Africa is a beautiful place. It's really worthwhile visiting. The people are very friendly. The food is amazing. And in terms of value for money for food, it's probably one of the best places in the world to go.
And no GMO yet?
Well, the South Africa has a lot of very fertile soil. It's so easy to grow good food. In fact, I'd never heard of genetically modified stuff when I was growing up. Okay, it just wasn't a word we used at all because the food there is just
at that time, no. But today,
I can't say for sure for today, but again, that being said, what you do have in South Africa are these like little farmers, really rural farmers, and they'll sit by the side of the road with their basket full of mealie corn and their pumpkins and their watermelons, and those are the guys you got to buy from. Support these little dudes on the side of the road. Don't go into the supermarkets, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what about other stuff that in Europe, for instance, and the States is really getting a problem, like cell towers, because that also is an instrument of dumbing down and mind control and you name it. How bad is that in South Africa?
I would say no different to anywhere else. I'd say actually because Holland is one of the most densely populated countries in the world, it's very bad there. Okay. Very bad. Like if you, for example, live where we lived when we were in The Hague, which is, Scheveningen, right on the beachfront with lots of up and down blocks of flats, easily like 2,000 to 10,000 people per square kilometer or something like that. Maybe more, maybe. But yeah, and everyone probably has a cell phone or two cell phones or whatever. So it's crazy. The thing about South Africa is you do have a lot of land space. So yes, places like Johannesburg, Cape Town, they have big city centers, Pretoria and Durban, obviously, but it's not actually terribly different to the way we experience life here in the Algarve, and that is because of the good climate and the big open spaces and lots of trees. There's obviously a lot of absorption of the radiation, a lot of hills. So it's not a direct pounding like you do in flat landscapes. So you're not getting all the cell phone towers at the same time. And also because there's a lot of space between people, you're not getting affected by everyone in the neighborhood cell phone. So it's not as bad as you would say would be in Europe or perhaps in New York. Again, it depends on where you are. City centers obviously worse than in the countryside.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so what else can we do to bring the reality of South Africa, the whites in South Africa, to the world so that more people will know about it? Because I think it should be a thing from bottom up, a groundswell of people who are aware what's going on there and who, it's strange. Second World War, whites were fighting whites. So now we are in a situation we should bond together worldwide, no matter what.
Yeah.
How can we bring that awareness to people?
Well, I would like to first off say the thing people can do is support the Sovereign State of Good Hope. Check out the website, which is the Sovereign State of Good Hope, sovereignstateofgoodhope.org. Please get in touch if anybody does want to help or has great ideas or wishes to be a part of it or just wants to be on the mailing list. There is a contact page. Obviously, it's not hard to find information about the genocide in South Africa. Just Google, write white genocide South Africa. There's a number of documentaries that have been made about it. And if anybody wants to learn more, please go to my website, stopsouthafricangenocide.org. They're welcome to download a copy of my ebook, The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy, Book 1, Light and Dark. It's freely available. It's banned in South Africa, which is why I give it away for free as an ebook. And then you can also get a copy of my film, The Last of the Boers, which is available on stopsouthafrican.org. I beg your pardon, stopsouthafricangenocide.org. And The Last of the Boers is a documentary of the history of the Boers and leading up to present times to what's being done to these people. And the film being called The Last of the Boers is because it's written from my perspective, being descended from the Boers. And, you know, we could be looking at their genocide as the farmers, which are, as you know, Boers, the Dutch word for farmer, as the farmers are murdered. And the whole farm murder frenzy that's going on is only escalating. Every day more and more farmers are being murdered.
Yeah.
So it's there is enough material information. If people want to share it, that would be great. Please just make people aware of what's happening. But also what we want to do is, I hate to say I want to give people hope, because I believe hope can also be a bit of a disease. I want to say that I want to give people a solution, and the Sovereign State of Good Hope is a very viable, realistic, tangible solution. So please, people, support the Sovereign State of Good Hope. Get in touch. I'm open to discussing with people who have solutions to bring forward. I've been actively involved in conference calls and conversations for the last week and a bit with people who are coming forward with amazing structural modalities to help implement self-sustaining and a self-determining nation state. And I'm very inspired. And I know that by what I'm seeing, that there absolutely is the opportunity and the know-how to do this. All we need is for the people to understand why it's necessary, how it's necessary, and that, you know, it can happen. They need to, I hate to say believe, I hate to say, you know, we want to give you hope. They need to recognize the reality of how serious it is and recognize that they are ultimately responsible for changing that, because this opportunity now exists. It's not just a, you know, there is no caveat for an option. There is. There absolutely is.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Well, I'm almost through my questions, I think.
Yes.
You told us quite a lot. Is there anything else that you absolutely want to have said?
No, Desiree, it's been good to talk to you again. It's been far too long. You and I need to catch up some more. But yes. I know you've been very busy, and I just want to say congratulations. You recently became a grandmother again, and I think you're turning, how young are you now in the next few weeks?
I now have at this moment, I still have the funny age, 69.
Well, look, I'm sure I'll get to speak to you before your birthday, but you do such a great job with all the work that you do. You know, exposing the medical frauds and the criminal medical industry. And it's, you know, such a privilege to have you as part of our extended circle of friends. You know how much we love you and appreciate the work that you do.
And I love you too, and Biggie. And yes, we have quite a history together. Huh?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, that's very bonding also. Yeah. Okay, Mel, thank you very much for everything that you told us from your heart, because that I could feel. Without a doubt. When you speak to King Cornelius, give him my love and my respect. I really, really respect him very much.
We will do. I think we must organize you an interview with him yourself, so you can actually have a little chat to him. I think he would love to chat to you.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yes. Okay. And thank you, my dear listeners and viewers. This was the Minority of One report of March 21st, 2018. Bye-bye.
Humanity has been on an epic journey of discovery, learning the truth about the world we live in. New discoveries about the true origins of humanity, ancient history, free energy, as well as the systematic corruption of world governments are now on the forefront of our daily reality. Is the world headed towards destruction based on control and power? Or is an opportunity now being presented to shift and uplift into a higher consciousness? My name is Mel Ve, co-founder and creative director of Conscious Consumer Network, an independent broadcast network that was launched on the 1st of January 2015. In the last 3 years, Conscious Consumer Network has broadcast over 2,800 shows in multiple languages, featuring guests from across the world, whilst creating media that is aimed at the creation of a free, fair, peaceful, just, sustainable world. Conscious Consumer Network provides full training and an interactive support network for all broadcasters, and we are always looking for inspiring and educational content.
Hi, this is Lainey Liberty.
And this is Miro Siegel.
In 2018, Conscious Consumer Network has expanded to multiple broadcast locations, increasing our availability and reach across the world, remaining on the cutting edge of independent media. If we wish to create a better world, we must first create better media, geared towards real education instead of indoctrination.
You guys really are what changing the world is going to be about. It's educating kids at a grassroots level.
Having become a pillar of stability in the turbulent world of independent media, we have even more going on in 2018. Conscious Consumer Network is a publicly funded network, and we rely on all of you to keep us on the air. Show your support for independent media by donating to our 2018 Network Support Fund. Dare to seek a better world. Support independent media.